Hello, this is Julian with Coffea Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Medina WX wash processed Colombia from Coffea Circulor. And there's the bag right there. And Coffea Circulor, based out of Arendal, Norway. And this is the final standard offering that we're going to be featuring from them this month, but arguably the biggest catalyst for this entire purchase, as I've heard so many positive things about this producer this year, but the only coffee we featured from them was the Astrid Medina Gesha from Flower Child, which was a slightly underwhelming coffee. So I definitely wanted to go back and try something else from Astrid Medina when I saw Coffea Circulor release this coffee, and it immediately caught my interest. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 41. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Coffea Circulor's recipe, which is a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, about 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this one, you can definitely tell that this one is on the lighter side of things, and it's been very much in line with our previous experiences from Coffea Circulor, which is definitely on the lighter side of most coffees by most standards and metrics. So this one right here was a very light coffee. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this one. Day 14, first impression, and interestingly enough, we actually did opt for the Chemex with this first impression, and it was surprisingly fresh fruit forward, as it was reminiscent of some lighter stone fruit aspects, with plenty of the listed honey in abundance as well. It did also offer a fair bit of the classic South American chocolate nutty characteristics in addition to that fruit brightness. So all those factors definitely made for a very positive first try, especially for a washed South American coffee. Day 17 opted for the V60, and it was yet another nice day as it continued to remain more fresh fruit forward with an almost peachy sense to it. In addition to that, there was more of the nuttiness in the cool down and finish, but for the most part, the cup continued to remain clean, sweet, and vibrant. So two really positive first impressions. Day 20 opted for the April brewer, as the cup continues to remain much more fresh fruit forward than anticipated, with more of the fresh stone fruit sweetness, but also a bit of a noticeable brightness all around. Chocolate, nuttiness, and honey all being the more defined aspects, and even more defined at this time too. So some really positive days. All three of the first tries have been really positive. Day 27 opted for the V60 with Coffea Circulor's recipe, and somehow this is the best the coffee has been up to this point, as it continues to offer plenty of those fresh fruit characteristics in an almost peachy sense. And what's really interesting to me about this coffee is that they don't really have too many fruit notes listed on here. So that's why I think I was going into it expecting maybe a very well done South American coffee with a lot of South American characteristics to it. But the amount of fruit sweetness I was getting from this one was really surprising, and it was persistent, as every single day I was getting a lot of that. I do believe a lot of the time when it comes to Coffea Circulor's coffees, whenever you see that yellow plum note listed anywhere on the coffee, you might want to try it, because it does tend to offer a lot of really nice peachy components to it. In addition to that, let's see here, the chocolate was a bit more present in a slightly more sweet sense, with a caramel candied sweet aspect also present, and it complemented the nutty components to it. So overall, a really great day. Really enjoyed that day 27 mark. But still, the best was yet to come, as on day 30, we ran it through the Chemex with Coffea Circulor's recipe. And if it wasn't quite as fruit vibrant, there was a lot of this kind of golden apple sweetness that they had listed on here. So let me say this, my favorite type of apple is the opal apple, and the reason I like them so much is because they are insanely sugary. They are a very, very sweet apple, and that's something I was kind of experiencing from this one, as the listed honey was also present in a brighter sugary sense. Still a slight bit of that lighter stone fruit, but it felt highly caramelized in the sweeter aspects overall. So this one was very good, slightly different, but I think I just kind of enjoyed the complementary caramelized sweet components to it to kind of round out the entirety of the cup, with a lot of those sugary sweet aspects as well. So this one continues to remain much more sweet than expected. Day 32 opted for the V60 with Coffea Circulor's recipe, and this is the least fruit vibrant it had been through this brew method, and that was kind of interesting to me because up to this point it had been very consistent, but on this day it wasn't quite there, as it was a little bit more in line with the traditional South American characteristics with a strong chocolate base, a stronger honey aspect, a darker fruit profile, some spiced chocolate, as well as plenty of the listed apple-like brightness yet again. So just different in general, a little bit more in line with the traditional expectations. Day 34, back through the Chemex, and this is actually the best it's been, as it now is offering some of the strong stone fruit vibrancy yet again, in line with the listed yellow plum. That's something I've highlighted earlier already. It's coming off very peachy. In addition to that, it has a very well-defined and great clarity within the coffee, as the peachiness as well as the sweet caramel, softer milk chocolate, slight nuttiness with plenty of the apple brightness all remain very defined, and another great day for this one. Day 37, final notes we have, there hasn't really been any sort of drop off in this otherwise wonderful coffee, as it still continues to remain clean and bright with an abundance of fruit factors, especially upon the cool down. There is a slight bit of the bergamot-like citrus, which is something I often very much associate with Coffea Circulor's coffees. I don't know what it is about their coffees, but so many of them have that kind of, I'll say, herbal citric component to them, and that was also present within this one. In addition to that, there is the peachiness as well as that sweet caramel coming through within the finish. Really liking all of those aspects of this one. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, and we have quite a few level 4s. So we'll actually start with the cleanliness level 4. Yes, this is one of those coffees where the cleanliness is actually very, very high for a level 4, and I always say that I like to reserve that for coffees that are either just exceptionally perfectly well defined, and I think I've only ever had one of those that wasn't a washed Panamanian geisha. So this one right here, it's very much on the higher side of level 4. I did toy around with the idea of pushing it all the way up to that level 5 because the amount of clarity that's present within this one is absolutely wonderful. I was able to pick out so many of these flavor notes with such ease that it really pushed the limits of what just a standard wash processed Colombian coffee can do. So massive credit to them on that. Might be one of the best parts of this coffee, which is saying something because there were so many wonderful parts of this one. Finish, level 4. Yes, very even finish to it. And this is a wash processed coffee, so you probably expect a very even finish, and this one right here definitely was in line with that level 4, right there in the perfect measure that you'd hope for within the finish of a coffee. Sweetness, level 4. I don't think that this tasting wheel is really doing this coffee justice because this is also on the higher side of level 4. As far as washed South American coffees go, this is just wonderful in terms of that sweetness. This offered way more sweetness than I ever would have expected going into it, and it came in a number of directions, so that kind of candied caramel sweetness. I think that they have a toffee note listed on here, the chocolate sweetness, but most specifically the fruit sweetness that was present within this one. That's probably the part that took me by surprise the most. As somebody actually told me when I purchased this coffee, it doesn't really sound like your coffee, and I go, the combination of factors, the fact that this producer is supposed to be really good, and Coffea Circulor always does really nice washed and vibrant wash processed coffees for me. I feel like this combination of factors is going to make this a very good one, and that's kind of demonstrated in this tasting wheel that's actually not doing this coffee justice. Stone fruit, level 4. Yes, and that's the biggest takeaway I have from this one is my surprise that this coffee had as much of this peachy sense that it did. This was present start to finish throughout the entirety of this one, and it's something that I very much enjoyed. We had one day where it wasn't quite as present, and that's why I didn't really go back to the V60. But when I was getting that from this one, I really seemed to push that a lot because I really wanted to highlight and emphasize that aspect of this coffee. Caramel, level 4. Yes, and I think it's well known at this point that I really do love that brown candy sweetness that's present within coffee. This is a little bit more in line with the expectations I might have had going into it, but given just how sweet it was, scoring right there at the level 4, if not on the higher side of level 4, that's saying a lot about this coffee, especially just how much sweetness it was offering. Then we have a couple of level 3s. We'll start with the acidity, level 3. It wasn't necessarily too bright, and that could have been a number of factors. I think most specifically the fact that we did keep the temperatures a little low, as that's what Coffea Circulor does suggest. For anybody that isn't familiar, a lot of my inspiration for brewing coffee is actually taken from this coffee roaster, so I do tend to have softer water and lower temperatures in general to just kind of see how that plays out. And in this coffee, it really seemed to work out exceptionally well, as the brightness was maybe a little bit lower than some people might like, but it was made up for in so many other factors, specifically the sweetness for me. Florality, level 3, yes, their coffees continue to offer this floral aspect to it, and as I've kind of highlighted, it did have that herbal citric component that oftentimes I align with bergamot, and that right there played a role in it. But in addition to that, a little bit of that floral chocolate aspect that's also been present in a number of their coffees. Berry fruit, level 3, yes, and I could say that there's a slightly darker, almost berry grape-like aspect that's present within this one. Not necessarily the most pronounced or prominent thing within it, but it's still notable enough to reach that level 3 mark. As well as that citrus fruit, that's another thing I can point directly towards being that bergamot-like aspect that's present in a lot of Coffea Circulor's coffees. I've heard that be a little bit of a turnoff to people. It's not something that I particularly enjoy, but I feel like oftentimes the rest of their coffees make up for that by offering really well-defined flavors to it, so I don't mind it being there. In addition to that, the chocolate, which probably on the higher side of level 3, it was maybe not as pronounced as some of the other factors within this one, but it was definitely present and consistent throughout the entirety of this one. Final thing worth discussing is going to be the body at a level 2. Again, interesting to me that all of the standard coffees anyway that we have reviewed from Coffea Circulor in this mini-series has scored the level 2 for body. So they have been on the lighter side of the body, which again is kind of interesting to me, but they seem to be along the same sort of theme in terms of the overall texture to it. So that might be a little bit of a negative to some people, but not necessarily the biggest priority to me. A lot of that could have been because we did brew it with the Chemex and it did have a little bit more body in the V60. Honestly, that's one thing I would have bumped up to the level 3 with the other brew method. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think that it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, I was really impressed with this coffee, and I think I would have to look at our catalog of coffees that we reviewed this year, because nothing, at least on the top of my mind, is coming up in terms of Colombian coffees that are reviewed that I might have liked more than this one. This one right here was absolutely outstanding, and the fact that this is a standard washed Colombian coffee, I don't even know the variety on it off the top of my head, but I know that it's nothing overly special. That's a testament to a lot of people, most specifically the producer as well as the roaster, because I think that this was exceptionally well done across the board. One of my favorite standard offerings that we have ever reviewed on this channel, definitely this year for sure. So I feel like this is a very strong contender to finish in our top 10 coffees of the year list. But in terms of just straight value, this is one of the best value coffees I think that we've ever reviewed on the channel, because it's not necessarily that expensive for a 250 gram bag of coffee, and given the quality that I was experiencing from this one, I was really taken aback by it. This one right here could justify a higher price tag, could justify being a higher end coffee in general. So a lot of positives to say about this one. I really enjoyed every part of it, most specifically the sweetness, the fruit component, slight bit of florality, but the clarity was really what sold me on this one, because this is an exceptionally well done and exceptionally well defined coffee. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, those are the directions I'm going to point you towards, but obviously keep in mind the lighter profile of this one in general. As mentioned, there are a couple of things that might be a slight bit of a turnoff. Maybe not quite as much body, maybe not quite as much acidity. Two things that I don't particularly care about too much within this one. And then there's also that kind of slight herbal citric component to it that I say can be a little bit of a turnoff to some people. But if none of those things bother you, then there's no negatives I do have about this one, as it offered way above average sweetness, way above average clarity, some wonderful fruit components to it, some subtle florals, but also some great depth in general, as it was a very well structured coffee from start to finish. I think that's the best way I can leave this review. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the Medina WX wash processed Colombia from Coffea Circulor. Thank you for watching.